Hi everybody, I'm Kevin Kimmel, Systems Application Engineer with Yamaha Commercial Audio North America. Here with a couple of buddies of mine from R&D here in the States, and this is Russ Long and Chris Taylor. We've all got some mixed experience, quite a bit. I wonder, we should have added up the years actually, that'd be scary.
No, let's not do that.
But
I disagree with that statement.
But with that experience though, we bring some interesting tales and experience. So we can talk about how we've used these consoles on shows we've done. So Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your history, because a lot of people may not know who we are.
I started doing audio quite a long time ago and toured for many years with a lot of different bands, but mostly toward the end of my career, I started doing lots of award shows and orchestra shows. David Foster for a few years. I did a Barbra Streisand's tour. So I have a lot of experience doing lots of inputs on a console or multiple consoles. And so we talked earlier about the things that we had done. In the last couple of years, I've got an opportunity to use the RIVAGE consoles, and I'm very impressed in how easy it is to manage lots of input numbers on the console.
Yeah, and but you've done. There's not that we all want to sit here and drop names, but you tour with Michael, with Janet, and tons of people, Joe Cocker, all kinds of folks, and with that history just comes so much knowledge. And I gotta give some credit, because Chris was working on RIVAGE from the beginning very closely with the engineers in Japan. So I often, when I'm showing people these consoles, I let them know that your fingerprints are all over this console. I give you a lot of credit for pushing, and I think that a lot of the reason these things sound as good as they do is because of your influence and your insistence on the engineers in development to go there. And you stayed on them and helped them make it as good as it is. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, I tried my best.
There's a big difference between trying and succeeding, and this time you succeeded.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, how about you, Russ? What have you done? 'Cause I don't even know you.
Well, nothing compared to that. No, 30 years as an audio engineer, both studio and live work, and done a fair amount of touring, tons of records, and in the last few years, I've got to spend a lot of time on the RIVAGE consoles. I've done 24 or more shows with Vince Gill and Amy Grant at the Ryman. Did a lot of orchestra shows with Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith, with shows, 64-piece orchestra, 110 inputs, and pretty large shows, and have been really thrilled with the way RIVAGE sounds at large channel count shows, and also how easy it is to manage every input when you're on that large of a show.
Yeah, good. So I started back in '79 as a monitor guy with a band. I had a big #1 hit on the radio at the time, and a couple of them, and did that for a while, and moved to California, worked at Disney for 37 years. Been with Yamaha for I guess 11 now. I was out with Luis Miguel, front of house. I do a lot of monitors, work on the Grammy pre-tel show, use these consoles actually on that show, and we can talk about some of that. I've done a number of other things, but collectively I think we've got some little bit under our belt. So and the last time that we did one of these was when we did the launch. Now, we were each in our respective places. Now we finally were able to get together for this one, which I'm good to see you guys. And there we touched on a lot of the features, and we'll touch on those features, but let's talk about how we use some of these features and what makes this thing so easy to use. So, Chris, why don't you start off with ergonomics and some of those things?
Okay. These consoles have gone to a lot of trouble to make them light. The PM5 is aluminum. It's 93 pounds. The PM3 is 84 pounds. So they're easy to handle. The 5 is especially impressive because you have the same fader pitch as the PM10s and 7s, and you've got 3 screens. And in this small compact package. Also, in the new consoles, to make them smaller and lighter, they've made the reach a lot shorter. We have the name strips are on the screens now, and they're much larger with much bigger fonts, and they're actually great colors, and actually a whole lot easier to see than the name strips that are into the console.
Yeah, yeah, great. Russ, you know, these screens on these the PM3 and 5 are new as well. You want to show us a couple things there?
Yeah, I mean, these are capacitive screens, so they support multi-touch operation, which is something people have been asking for a long time. And for example, if I have a frequency that I've boosted or cut, I can use two-finger operation to either narrow or broaden the cue. And if I've got multiple adjustments being made, I can take everything above the axis and adjust it with 3 fingers, or everything below the axis and adjust it with 3 fingers. Or if I want to increase or decrease the overall intensity of the EQ, I can actually use 4 fingers and do that entire thing with one motion. Now the problem is the 7 and the 10 don't have capacitive screens, so they can access that same multi-band operation by using this multi-band operation button, and then with one single finger I can do the same kind of adjustments that I could do with the multi-touch operation on the 7 or on the 5 or the 3.
Yeah, it's pretty good, because some of those features do carry over to the 7 and 10. So yeah, so I think the advancements with the screens are going to be well received on these consoles for sure. So I think maybe I'll show you some stuff on the selected channel, a couple things. And while we may step up to the 5 or the 3, everything that we do works on the entire RIVAGE family. So because there's one happy family and it's all the same. So on the PM10 and 7, of course, we have the large selected channel that Yamaha is known for. On this series, with the 3 and the 5, we've condensed it down. So instead of having LCD screens for each encoder, we don't, but when you touch an encoder, you can get a value on the screen depending on which screen you're looking at. And so all this helps us save space. We have one gain knob. You can determine in software whether that's a head amp or a digital gain. Instead of having 2 sets of knobs and buttons for the dynamics, we control them both here. So I'm now working on my gate, now I'm on my compressor, for example, and you can see it change on the screen as you do that. And then a lot of the other things are done on screen. And one example of that would be in the PM10 and PM7 series, we have these encoders under the screens. And there's 2 rows of encoders on the 7 and 10. The top row of encoders is always tied to the screen. They are screen encoders, and the second row is an assignable encoder with a button that you can toggle between 5 different functions. I've put a shortcut to it where you would come in and assign it in preferences. And so here we could come in and assign the functions for that second row of encoders on those other desks. Here we do it on the screen. So I can scroll through here. There's well over 100 things that we could make it. And so then they can be that. So if I come out of that, you wonder, okay, how do I get to that? And that is the encoder assign. So I can touch on that, and when it's set to screen encoders, whatever I touch here, these are highlighted, they drop down, and we can see the values here. To these row of encoders. But if I'm just starting my sound check for the first time with the band, maybe I don't make it that, and now it's analog gain. So I've got 12 head amps right here. Go to my next layer, onto another 12 head amps. Or maybe in show mode, I'm not going to adjust the head amp so much, so I could make one of these digital gain, and it would show up as digital gain. I could make this silk, and I'd have 12 silk knobs here, and so very quickly dialing that stuff up. So this is a new function with these consoles that works really, really well. Another one is when I'm running front of house, a lot of times I don't want to go to sends on faders. I want to keep my hands on my faders, but I might need to make some adjustments for a reverb send, or maybe if I'm doing monitors from front of house. So I could go to sends on faders, of course, and on the 7 and 10 we have all the send knobs to the right, the hardware knobs. Well, how do we go about it here? There's a couple different ways, but I'll show you one. We have a send and user-defined knob assignment here, and whichever one you choose from this comes to the surface, and you always have that knob on the surface. So if I go to sends, I can get to all the buses on the console here. So I can come up and say, hey, on mix 11, I want this selected channel, in this case my left background vocals, that much. And I can adjust the pan and the level. And so, and I certainly have one on and off, and I suspect we'll probably add pre and post in here later on. And then and when it is pre, by the way, they show up green. When it's post, it shows up orange. So at a glance, you know what you're looking at. We also have 4 user-defined hardware knobs on the 7 and 10, and with LCD screens, and 4 layers deep, so effectively 16 of them. Here it's screen-based, so you could come in and assign something to these, and then it shows up here. And if I'm in the sends mode and I select Mix 11, it's Mix 11, that kind of thing. So very quickly I can get to a lot of things and assign it to one button and have quick access to those features. There's some other cool things. There's a new knob here. We have a function knob that we didn't have before, and this could be any number of things. So we know that we have touch and turn. When I touch on an encoder on the screen, it makes my touch and turn knob that until I touch on another one. Well, the function knob allows us to lock into something, and that's this yellow one, a circle we see here. If for some reason I wanted it to be my high EQ gain, I can push and hold my function button and touch that, and I've now made it that until, and I can select different channels, and it will remain that until I assign it to something else. So this function is good for channel encoders. So we can lock it into different parameters. Maybe that's another great use for Silk, because we don't have the Silk knob dedicated to the selected channel here. So those are some of the things that we've done to make these surfaces more I don't know, user-friendly. The workflow is very good, I think, with doing stuff on screen.
So Kevin, how do you access the transformer emulation buttons, Silk knobs, phantom power? Because those buttons do not exist on the selected channel on this right now.
Yeah, so I assign those to user-defined keys. So we have a lot of user-defined keys. Here on the PM3, we can see we've got 4 banks of 12 or 2 banks of 24, plus we have a couple on the surface. Like the PM5D had that 25th user-defined key for those most popular things. We've got an E1 and an E2 on the surface. So I would assign a user-defined key probably on one of these layers. For me, I know on the PM7 and 10, layer D is my utility stuff. So I use user-defined keys for setup things and things like that. And so that was phantom power. And I probably would maybe not on my utility page, but I would put the Silk on and off there as well. That's one option. We've got multiple ways to go about it, but that's one thing that I've done, I know, on the other surfaces.
Cool.
That's great, Kevin. Thanks. As is the case with the entire Rivage family, the backbone of the PM3 and the PM5 is the TWINLANE network. The TWINLANE network is a proprietary audio network created by Yamaha that supports 32-bit 96K audio, 400 channels that are dually redundant, and the latency is only 12 samples. So it's a really, really impressive system, robust, and as I said,
it's fast.
Yeah, really, really fast.
Yeah. When you plug it up, does it?
It's plug and play.
Plug and play.
Attach the devices. So the network sees them and it works.
There's no program you have to do to connect your devices.
No.
Yeah, that's great, because it does. If you got your cards loaded in, it knows what's in the system. So yeah, yep.
Yeah, really great system. Really easy to work.
Another proprietary network that we created for Rivage is the console network, which is that's a pair of Cat5s that goes between the Surface and its DSP or DSPs, or Surfaces and DSPs, right? It connects in a ring. It's super simple. There's nothing to know about it, right? Just plug an in to an out to an in to an out, and away you go. There's no patching. You've got to just stay within 100 meters of your DSP, but that's also really easy, and that's one of the beauties of TWINLANE, is how fast, how reliable, and how easy it is.
One of the coolest things I like about it is that it is the TWINLANE network, the audio network with the inputs, is totally redundant. It's internally redundant, and it's redundant with the ring, so you can actually have a disconnect between 2 devices and you will still have all of the inputs. Same way with the console network. If the console for some reason locks up and you have to restart it, the audio from all your Omni ins and outs still pass audio.
And the MY card slots on the back of the desk as well. That's right. Yeah, it's pretty slick the way that all goes together. In the GUI, it's very apparent what's happening, and so it's not, you don't have to worry about learning a new network. It's just like you said, plug and play. So Chris, what about user preferences and the way you can lay out your workflow and things like that within the GUI and whatnot?
Well, the RIVAGE system from the very beginning is very, very flexible. It was designed in a certain way that each bay can access everything in the console. You can access all your inputs, you can access all your outputs, all your matrices, your custom fader layers, your mix ins, everything can be seen. DCAs, everything you can be operated from one bay. So you could actually sit on this one bay and mix everything you needed to do.
I did that. I did a Foo Fighters concert that way.
Yeah?
Yeah, I was training, I was training their monitor guy, and the front of house guy, Brian, wasn't available. They had a private thing at their studio fundraiser, and so they had a little analog console. Instead of Ian having to do front of house and monitors from this little analog console, I said, what if we just, what if I come by with the PM10, and your first gig would be for a couple hundred people in a studio setting, and I'll mix front of house in this bay in that one left section there, and you can mix over here. And so when I was programming, he was programming, and we did a whole concert that way. So it was proof of concept. I mean, it was.
Yeah. And also because you have the two Q buses, you can separate the Q buses and y'all have your own separate queues. That's very handy if you're going to do stuff like that.
Yeah, and that comes in on Broadway stuff as well. When you have a sound designer who needs to jump in and do things either in the rehearsal time or even during a show. And House of Worship as well.
Yeah, for me, when I was talking about earlier doing orchestra stuff, most of the times I was in 130s, 140 numbers of inputs. That's 3 consoles. And now you can do all of that here. And if you sit down and set it up properly, you can have a custom fader layer of like first violins, second violins, and they just show up on that layer. You can create stems for yourself. So one person can do massive numbers of inputs and have control over it because you can break it up in sections and be able to control it. I mean, you can have your rhythm section on a thing, your pop star, and all of those things. And it's amazing what you can do on this one surface that used to take lots of rolling around.
Yeah, just it's fader management at that point, right?
And if you do have a separate orchestra mixer, he can work on one bay, and it'll operate like it's his own console.
You can do like the way we're connected up here is that you can connect 2 consoles on the same DSP, and both consoles work the same stuff.
On the screen, can you show us on the screen on the PM5 in preferences how you can set up those bays and how things can track together or not from bay to bay?
Okay. That's in system configuration. No, it's not system configurations. It's device preferences. I'm sorry. You said right. You said it right. It was preferences. And so you have the ability. It shows you all 3 screens here on the 5, and you can actually choose which screen you want to be the selected channel. You're not to view the selected channel. So when you when you change a knob, the little indicator shows up on that particular channel. You can link your fader banks, you can link your send banks, you can separate them all up, you can link your shift keys, you can link your home keys, you can choose what bay selects the cue, and all of this accessible on this one bank. So you can have this basically be one complete console. This is another complete console if you want to, or you can tie them all together if you like everything to flip at once. And during a setup, in most days, you would have different jobs during the day. You're doing line check, then you're doing sound check, and then you're doing your show. It allows you to create 4 different banks of preferences the way you would want to set up and go through your day.
And change your workflow. I mean, it's a whole workflow setup thing, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. And to me, one of the coolest things about the console is that we have an extra layer that you usually don't get, and that's the layer that you patch. And it's always accessible to you. So in situations to where that, say they at the last minute walk up and give you an extra MC, where do you put that MC when you have to attach everything to a fader bank? This way you can put it on the end and it's always accessible there, or an emergency comes up that they move a patch around, it's always there on the console. You don't have to go program anything to get to that.
And the custom fader banks are all, you can program those on the fly too. So if there are a couple of inputs added last minute, you can add those to a custom fader bank during the show, and it's not going to cause a glitch in the audio or anything.
Yeah, right. And it's a really cool feature that most people don't really realize what it's for, but it's there to help you with any kind of, because we've all been in situations to where that no matter how well you program, there will be a change.
Yeah.
I actually did a show one time to where that I'd programmed the console perfectly, I thought, but the lead singer walked out, and it was a production thing, so we had MC mics, then you had a band play MC mics, and as soon as the pop star came out, he picked up the MC mic, and it was on the second layer. So the whole night was spent switching layers, and that becomes kind of an issue. So these kind of things kind of help you through those emergency situations.
Yeah.
Right.
Another thing, I'll show something else here, if I may. Like on PM10 on that Grammy pre-tel show that I do, I think I've done it for 9 or 10 years now. I've laid out the desk differently over the last couple years, but I've come up with a workflow that I really like. But I think I have sends-on faders in the center bay, and I have my outputs on the right bay, and then I have DCAs over here. And so with this kind of setup, and there's even more versatility with these surface settings that we have now, I changed this on the fly during rehearsal in that show, and that show moves really fast, where I needed my workflow to be different. And so for the first couple days where we were rehearsing with the house band, and so here's our navigation buttons where Chris was saying we have dedicated channels. So here's 1 to 72, and here's 73 through 144. If I need to get the higher channel count, I could touch these two and go into 145 and beyond. But I didn't have that on that show. It was just 144 channels. But I had
just 144.
Just 144. Yeah, we used I don't know, used a bunch of them. And so I had, I'm doing line check and working on house band, and they were basically on our first malt. So I'm just in that first 56 channels here, and I would put guest band malts here. And eventually I programmed in custom fader banks, and if I was doing something for the house band, it was there, and guest band here. Well, but the first couple days rehearsal was just with the house band. And so in sends-on faders, I have my outputs that I'm queuing up over here, and that would determine what I'm in sends-on faders for. And so as I went along, I then went to, and actually in that show, I'm mistaken, I had my outputs here, I'm queuing up, and then I thought, okay, I'll put my guest band over here. Well, when it came, so I thought I'll link these two so that when I flip, and this is basically 1 to 24, and then it would go 25 through 48. But when I did that, as the guest band started showing up and rehearsing with the house orchestra, I went to go do the line check on that second malt for the guest bands, and I went here thinking I'd get to channel 13 when in fact it was over here, but it was up a layer because I'd already gone down. And that slowdown in being on the wrong layer based on my brain was in this one workflow. I thought, okay, I can't fall behind an input or two here. I reset it, and I worked on guest bands here, I worked on house bands over here, and both in sends-on faders, eventually custom fader banks, and just queuing up what I needed. This last year I've gone to DCAs over here. I had sends-on faders for everybody here and my outputs here. And so I had here I had my house band stuff and my guest band stuff on this half of the navigation buttons. And when it was just one band or the other, house or guest, it was easy what layer I needed to be on. But when oftentimes for some of those bands that were sitting in, or artists who were sitting with the orchestra, then I needed lots of inputs. I needed more keyboards than that band's DCA allowed for. So I would just go over to a DCA for keyboards, and I'd roll out in sends-on fader for everybody's set of keyboards, and what mix do I want, cue it up over here. And I was able to change that on the fly, and this enables you to do that. And man, what a difference that makes. I mean, I often tell people that, it's kind of like playing Twister and being ambidextrous at the same time. The console lets you do that, and it almost encourages it to. So let's see, the next thing I was thinking about talking about was overlay, which is a pretty cool feature, and we can see an overlay button here. So how many times have you done a show and you didn't rehearse it? You have lots of scenes and you didn't get to rehearse in order. And that this probably affects monitor guys more, but on Broadway it would certainly affect the front of house guy. And as you make changes to things, especially, let's say, I'll just talk about monitors, and somebody says, hey, can you turn the background singers down in my mix, you know, a little bit? And you turn it down, but as soon as you go to that next scene, you don't have that. So we could do a global paste. We could do a recall safe on the sends, but those are actual, they're not relative changes. So when you recall that scene, it may not be right to how you stored it. It probably isn't, in fact. So we want to be able to make relative changes, and we have this overlay filter that we basically can lay over the desk, and at this time, it's good for channels and sends, and we see it in scenes. So if I open up scenes, I go to the overlay tab. So there's a couple ways to do this. I'll show you the slow way, and then I'll show you the fast way to do it. First thing we have to do is turn it on. So now we can see overlay has been turned on. Here's my channels, all ins and outs. So I'll just say inputs, and I'll go to, and I'll select channel 12, and here are my sends. So if I wanted to make adjustments to sends on faders, I would work there. We can see there's already been some things adjusted in here, but we'll just work on channel 12. And let's say I'm touring with a band, and this is my lead singer, and he's kind of blown his voice out, and every time I recall a scene, I've got to push, recall, push, recall, push. Not a big deal, but you know, we kind of get lazy. And so I want to fix that and just get through tonight. I don't think it's a permanent thing where I do want to do that global paste. So we could just push with this fader with every recall of a scene, but we could come in, and if I can push my touch and turn here, and we can see a number change there, and the value of the fader's moving. If I were to do big things, you see the fader move. I can push and turn for fine tune, and there I just brought it up 1.7. And I could close this out and come out, and now with every scene recall, I will add in this case 1.7 dB to this fader, or it could have been a send. Okay, so that's fine, and if this happens a lot, I could make it permanent. I could put it in a library. I could store it into other scenes. If this happens periodically with this singer, I could come in and just exclude it. The fader goes back to where it was, and when it happens again, because the guy does karaoke every other week or something, I could just recall it, and it's back in, and the fader bumped up again. Odds are I'm going to clear it and start over for what I need that day. So imagine you're at a house of worship or something when you have a drummer that sits in every 3 weeks, and that drummer has a lighter touch. So you would have to, this process might take quite a while to get him dialed in his ears and everybody's ears. So what if, I'm going to turn this off, now I'll show you the fast way to use it. If I go Shift, I'm going to even close that window. If I go Shift and Overlay, Overlay is now on. If I press and hold Overlay button, I'm now in Overlay Edit button, and we see flashing across the screen to give us an indication. So now I can come in and I can make adjustments to faders, and every place I adjust one, the on button comes on. If I didn't mean that one, I can hit and it goes back to where it had been before. But I can make adjustments to up and down to channels and sends. I can press and hold Overlay. To come out of that, I can go back in, and here we can see what I've done. And so if this is that sub drummer, maybe I do go ahead and make a library for him. But and so on an award show, that's a really great way to be able to make relative changes to sends, especially when you're working out of order, and have those changes that you make carry over to all your scenes, because it's just, you know, it's a temporary way to get through tonight. And those are usually, you know, a one-day thing once you get through rehearsals. So that's Overlay. Russ, I've been talking a bunch. Can you show us some shortcuts?
Yeah. There's a lot of really great shortcut workflows that can speed up console operation. One of the things, and a lot of them involve the Shift key.
Shift happens.
Yeah, Shift happens. So one of the things that, let me get back to a normal look here. Of course, we know there's 4 different EQ types built into the EQ channel, and if I know I want to use the aggressive EQ on the drums, rather than go through each drum input and change to the aggressive EQ, I can hold the Shift button and hit that selection, and I can actually choose a range, and I can say I want to go from 1 to 12, and I want to make every one of those the aggressive EQ, and I hit execute, and now that whole range of channels has the aggressive EQ on it.
Now that didn't change the filters, it's just the type of EQ, right?
Just the type of EQ. Settings are the same.
What else? Does that work on anything else?
Yeah, it works on your dynamics. I can do the same thing for my dynamics selection, and some other stuff you can do with the shift key. I can choose do a temporary link where, let's say, and the temporary link is fantastic because I've had to dial in orchestras really quick, and I'll go through and choose all my first violins, and even if they're on multiple layers, I can go through, and choose, they don't have to be consecutive. I can have 20 different channels selected over, 3 or 4 different layers, and then I can go through and I can rough in an EQ, put a high pass filter, set that. If they all have the same mic, and I know that there's frequency I want to dip, say I want to dip a little bit at 355 and boost a little bit at 6.3. Well, it does it to every one of those selected channels at the same time, and then I can just tap select on any channel and it pops out of that operation.
Yeah, that's a really great way to pre-dial and get things ballparked. So Russ, there's some pretty cool stuff to move you around quickly on the desk in the DCA part of things too. You want to show us some of that?
Yeah, I generally keep my DCAs in my center bay, and if I hold the shift key and select one of those DCAs, it automatically comes up on the screen. I can see what's assigned to that DCA, and I can jump right back out of it too. So it's a really quick workflow. Something else about the DCAs, I can roll out a DCA by hitting select, and it rolls out into either 1 or 2 banks depending on what I've set up in my preferences. And if the DCA has more channels than fit into the predefined area, then I can actually scroll through them with this knob above the DCA. So that's really handy way to get to any channel assigned to that DCA, even if you have a DCA that has more than 12 channels.
And frees up the other bays to have your hands on something else
Yeah, because you may be still doing stuff over here and you can't get away from that, but you need to get in there.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. So another cool thing that we've had for forever, I think we came up with the term, in fact, is virtual sound check. Chris, you want to show us a little bit about how that goes?
Sure. And when you're using the external DSPs, slot number 4 is the slot that's dedicated for virtual sound check. It's number 3 on the PM7, which basically is the last slot on both consoles. And we have Dante cards and MADI cards that you can use in that slot. So you can connect to just about anything you want to connect to via those 2 formats. So we normally use our Nuendo Live program to get more than 64 channels at 96K or 32 channels at 96K. You must use an accelerator card, which we also sell. So you can record to any format you want, but what Yamaha offers is the accelerator card to Dante.
The AIC 128 card, right?
AIC 128 card.
And that card will work in a expansion chassis. So if you're using a laptop, you can still use it. Just have a little Thunderbolt expansion chassis and stick it in there, and you're good to go.
Pretty slick.
And the virtual sound card patch on the console is very simple. It's on the patch page, and you go over to the recording tab and you click on the recording tab, and then it gives you the ability. You can see over here that you have your playback in and you record out. So you need to patch it, a very quick way to patch it, which you can patch all of the console the same way. Just click on this little tab there. What do you call that tab anyway?
I call it an icon. I don't know the official name for it, but
it's a bunch of dots there.
Yes.
And so once you get the crosshairs here crossed, and then you can just turn the knob and it will patch your patch 1-to-1. And then you click the green check mark and there you're patched. And you can also do that on the normal patch grid. Then you have to go over and patch the playback side of this. You don't have to record every channel. You don't have to play back every channel. You can choose what channel you want to play back for your virtual sound check.
So an example of that would be like somebody misses a sound check or a rehearsal, and you didn't get to dial in that mic or that person's ears, for example. You could, once the band is gone, go back in, do playback, right? And make that mic hot by deselecting it from the virtual sound check, and then or you could just do the world's biggest karaoke thing. But it's it is a good way to take care of things like that.
Yeah, and the way that you engage it, there's a big button here. You hit on, and you have a warning that you're going to go into virtual sound check. And so now what comes in the console is coming off your playback device. And you need to be very, very aware of the fact there's a little yellow light here that said VSC. That's flashing. I think everybody's done this before, is that you hook your console up and you don't have any sound coming through it, and you realize you have virtual sound check on.
Yeah, but you don't realize it for a while because the meters are reading on your input cage and stuff. But one thing that comes along with version 4 is, I believe, at the bottom of the screen where the names are, it tells you your virtual sound check down there. So there's some indication along the names at the bottom there that lets you know you're in virtual sound check. So that's at least we made it a little more obvious that you're in that mode. So
just be aware that if you're using virtual sound check, what happened? Yeah, if you're using virtual sound check, that you just need to be aware that when you turn it on and turn it off, because everybody that uses it has been hosed by that.
Yeah.
At least once. Yeah. Usually it only happens to you one time.
Yeah, once you're human, twice you're a fool. I'm in that 3 or 4 category. Yeah, thanks. So, one thing that we started doing with CL and QL series was having file compatibility amongst those families, and we really nailed it with the RIVAGE family. You want to talk a little bit about some of the compatibility things?
Yeah, I mean, one of the exciting things is the 3, the 5, the 7, and the 10 use the exact same file structure. So you can take a show file from any one of the RIVAGE consoles and load it on another console without any problems at all. Now, there's a couple things you need to be aware of. You need to make sure all your system configuration is the same, or that you make note of it. If you've got a different I/O device or whatever, you're going to have to patch that or set that up. But if you've got the exact same system, the exact same file will load. The other thing you need to note is that the DSP R10 is the only DSP that supports the TC reverb. So if you're coming from, and that the DSP R10 works on the 3, the 5, and the 10. So you could be using the 3 with the R10, but if you go to a 10 and you're using the EX DSP, then you're not going to have that TC reverb. You're going to have to put something else in there, which there's some great options, but the TC won't be there. The other thing is Yamaha makes a console file converter that will let you take any legacy Yamaha file. I mean, it could be a QL, it could be an LS9, it could be a PM5D, but you can take one of these old show files and convert it to a RIVAGE file. Now, that's not going to sound the same because it's a different console, but you're going to have the same structure, the same architecture, and you're going to start relatively close. So it's much easier than starting from scratch, and a great way to, if you're moving up from a PM5D, or you've got an old show file from a 5D and you want to mix the same band on a RIVAGE, it's not that difficult of a step. So there's a whole lot of great things involved with the file compatibility. I'm real excited about it.
Thanks, Russ. So if you want to take a look in the chat room, you'll see a link to next week's webinar where we're going to be talking about some of the things that help this system sound so good. This about wraps it up for today. Thanks for joining in, and hope you get your hands on one of these soon. I think you're going to really like it.